Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Happy New Year, everyone. Happy New Year. Yes, Happy New Year. Welcome to the January luncheon for the Douglas County Chamber. My name is Nadia Fawcett. I am very excited to be here. It's 2023, everyone. Okay, let's give a round of applause for that, right? So good afternoon. Welcome to the Greystone Power Community Impact Luncheon sponsored by Connolly Jordan and Associates and Metro Garage Doors, Insulation, and Fireplaces. I'm Nadia Fawcett. As I mentioned before, I'm going to be your chair for the 2023 Board of Directors for the Douglas County Chamber. And I just want to thank you. I want to personally thank you for joining us today. I do want to recognize Tanya Bird, who is our chair for 2022. She's the loud one right there. Yes. Thank you for your leadership, Tanya. You have big shoes to fill. Okay, awesome. Thank you again. I'd like to invite Charles Turner with Accra Printing to come forward and lead us in our invocation and pledge. Well, way to start the meeting. All right, there he is.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Just a word of the day, which I think is very appropriate to our group. I think the word integrity is something that we all need to look at this year. Webster defines it as a firm adherence to a code of especially moral and artistic values. It implies trustworthiness and incorruptibility to a degree that one is incapable of being false to a trust, responsibility, or pledge. C.S. Lewis' definition is clear and concise: doing the right thing even when no one is watching. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father God, we come to you today thankful for this day, even as gloomy as it is outside. Lord, we know that many here are carrying burdens, and we just lay those burdens at your feet right now. We pray, God, that you would just bless this meeting, bless the speakers, bless the food and the drink, and all of her here. Lord, many of us are carrying burdens, and we just lay them at your feet. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, Lord. Thank you for the opportunity to praise your name. For it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. We got the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. I'd like to invite our gold sponsor, Andrew Jordan from Connolly Jordan and Associates, to the stage for remarks, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Jordan, partner of Connolly Jordan and Associates. We are a value-driven CPA firm here in Douglasville that specializes in small business taxes as well as sort of complex individual tax returns. This last year, our firm has grown to a level of 16 people, which now includes 6 CPAs, 1 enrolled agent, and several other knowledgeable staff. We're very happy this year, or last year now, to bring Leslie Kraft on board with our most recent merger, and she brings to the table 30 years of experience. Now, for my tax update that none of you asked for, e-filing opens January 23rd, which is Monday. The IRS anticipates most taxpayers will receive their refunds within 21 days. However, if you're getting an earned income credit or child tax credit, the IRS does not anticipate issuing refunds until February 28th. So if you file on Monday, you wouldn't get it until February 28th or even March. Now, the IRS has hired more than 5,000 new telephone assisters and added more in-person staff to help support taxpayers this year, which is great considering only 13% of phone calls got answered last year. More than 168 million individual tax returns are expected to be filed this year, so that all that support really will come in handy for that. Now, with 168 million tax returns expected to be processed, and I think their current backlog is around 6 million, I wouldn't guess on my return. If you have a small business or any amount of complexity to your tax return, be sure that you're using a reputable preparer to prepare your returns and advise you. If you need a good CPA, just give us a call. We'll be happy to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I would also like to give a special thanks to our silver sponsor for today's event, Metro Garage Doors, Installation, and Fireplaces. Thank you, Derek, Chrissy, and team for your support. Where are you guys? Wave. Thank you guys for your support. And next, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our special guests attending today. If you are a board member of the Douglas County Chamber, could you please stand and introduce yourself? All right, Gil, can you start, please? I'm Gil. The Gil. All right, thank you. Let's give them board members a round of applause, please. And our diplomats and business outreach team, could you please stand for a round of applause? Also, if we have any elected officials joining us today, would you please stand and introduce yourself? Yep. Council.
Good afternoon, Tracy Brooker, Chair of the Douglas County Board of Education.
Vice Chair, Douglas County Board of Education. Kelly Robinson, Commissioner of the Second District, Board of District. Terry Miller, Mayor Pro Tem, City of Douglasville.
Awesome. Thank you to our elected officials for joining us today. We are also very proud of our 2023 Cornerstone members that join us today. I'm sure many of you may have noticed their slide, as the slides rolled earlier, them on the slides. But I do want to thank and recognize the group sitting in front here to the right-hand side, the Cornerstone members. If you could please stand and introduce yourself, please. You're everywhere, Gil. Awesome. Thank you, Cornerstone members. And our newest 2023 Chairman Circle Investors, Ellen, you were just standing. Please come back up. She is with Jones Wynn Funeral Home, and she's going to give us a brief remarks. Thank you for joining the Chairman Circle Investors team.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be among such amazing people in this new Chairman Circle group. My name is Ellen Wynn McBrayer. I'm with Jones Wynn Funeral Homes and Crematory and Meadowbrook Memory Gardens. I'm third generation. My grandmother was the first female to be licensed in the state of Georgia. My grandfather was also a licensed funeral director and embalmer. So 3 generations. My husband also right there, when we started dating, he said, I think the Lord's calling me into funeral service. I said, really? We work all the time. So, but he's also a licensed funeral director. And when he went to school, he had a friend, his best friend was in medical school, who he married a lawyer. She was in law school. So we were having dinner one night and, Josh said, I can't wait to sign everything medically yours, and we were like, that's great, he's in school. And then his wife said, well, I can't wait to sign everything legally yours, right? And then there was an awkward silence, and they looked at Scott, and he goes, well, I can't wait to sign everything eventually yours. But in all seriousness aside, we've been in this funeral service since 1950. I've had an opportunity to learn from a husband and wife team, my grandparents, and then my parents. And when my dad died of a massive heart attack when I was at Auburn, before I graduated Auburn University. And that was what the Lord used to call me back into funeral service. And so that was my journey into funeral service. I could talk about how our funeral home has won, the small business of the year. One year, the second place was Elf on the Shelf that year. Talk about an award ceremony with a child, trying to get them out of the room for Elf on the Shelf, who was second place to us. And it's not about an award, but it's about serving a broken heart, right? I could talk about how we're the only funeral home that has our own on-site crematory. So no one's loved one has to be outsourced for cremation. So I could talk about all the awards and the people that we work with, that work with us, the Jones Wynn family, but it's about the little baby that's sitting there who's just lost a dad and will never get to know his dad. A funeral is not a day in a life, but rather a lifetime in a day. And there are other funeral home providers in this area, but for us, it's about a broken heart. It's not about numbers or awards. It's about a broken heart and how to heal it and walk with people through the hardest time of their life. So that's a little bit about us. So I could talk all day long about the amazing people that we work with, but the funeral home in Villa Rica was started in 1950. My mom actually grew up there. The funeral home in Douglasville was started in 1999. First thing we did before the ground was even broke was join the chamber. So it's an honor to be here and to still be a part of this amazing group. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's discussion on the state of the economy. Each speaker will give a presentation highlighting the state of our economy. We will conclude with a few questions and answers, so have your questions ready. Our speakers are Dr. Joseph Smith from the University of West Georgia and Ian Wyatt with the Metro Atlanta Chamber. Thank you, Ian Wyatt and Dr. Smith, for all of your wonderful highlights that you'll be bringing to us, and then I welcome them to the stage. Thank you.
Well, happy 2023. It may turn out to be an odd year in more ways than one. One of the things we're going to talk about here is the Douglas County economy. Okay, we're going to focus in on Douglas. Ian and I have tried to team up a little bit and cover different components. So I'm going to try to keep it local, and Ian is going to look more at the Atlanta MSA area. Give you the Cliff Notes version here. The labor market is actually looking really good. It's looking better than a lot of economists have expected. In fact, it continues to produce unemployment rates that are below, that are at record low levels going forward. And so one of the things I want to temper that statement with is don't expect it to get a whole lot better than this from the standpoint of the labor force. We're seeing right now the labor force has returned to our area. A lot of people who left the labor force who weren't working during the pandemic, a lot of those people have returned, but there's still a pretty large group of people that haven't as well, and we're going to talk a little bit about those. Georgia is actually in pretty good shape. Even if we were to head into a mild downturn, Georgia, with a lot of different scenarios, I should say, has a backstop in a lot of different ways. We've got relatively full and overflowing tax coffers. We're actually collecting more taxes than we need. One of the reasons that or I should say, one of the reasons the governor decided not to collect the fuel tax for the last half of last year is because at the time it wasn't necessary. Okay, so we're doing pretty well in terms of tax revenues. We're also doing pretty well in terms of local employment. Douglas County employment is actually up pretty significantly over last year this time. One of the things I do want to point out is that the Federal Reserve right now is trying to push us as closely as it can get to a recession without actually creating one. That's basically what their job is right now. So in terms of expectations, the expectation that you should have for the Fed going forward is that it's going to be continuing to make things a little bit worse for all of us. It's just trying not to make it bad enough to where we actually tip over into a recession. Okay? And finally, or I should say next to finally, we are right now seeing rates, interest rates starting to affect the housing market. We're starting to see a pretty significant slowdown in price growth. We're seeing a pretty significant slowdown in the number of new houses that are being created, at least in the single-family market. And so that's going to have an impact on construction locally, and it's already had some of that impact. One of the last things here, though, is that global factors are pretty much going to be the dominant thing that drives the U.S. economy going forward. There's a lot of global factors for us to have to worry about. It's not clear which one of these up here is going to have the lead. We just don't really know yet. We always start off by looking at unemployment insurance claims, and claims are up from last year. This is new people going into unemployment, and they're up. They're not up a tremendous amount. They are in percentage terms, but they're not in terms of overall levels. We're only up about 368 new entrants into the unemployment rolls over 6 counties. Okay, so we're talking 6 different counties here: Carroll, Coweta, Douglas, Haralson, Paulding, and Polk. So that's not a very large number, but that does represent an increase of 39.5% over last year. Now I'm going to pick things up here a little bit. I've only got 15 minutes to cover about 2.5 hours worth of information, and they said I don't have 2.5 hours. By the way, take notes because there will be a quiz. Okay, so keep it up. Right now we're sitting at 2.6% unemployment rate. In my lifetime, up until recently, I'd never seen unemployment rates look like this. This is the best unemployment rate you could potentially hope for. One of the reasons this right here is a little bit troubling is that when you see unemployment rates this low, it usually triggers things like inflation. More people are working than the economy can sustain over the long haul. And so what's happening right now is we're putting more income into the workplace or into the local marketplace than the marketplace can currently sustain. We're increasing prices because more people are working than we're used to having. Right now, Georgia is sitting at 2.8%. Douglas County is at the top of our region at 3%. Now this looks bad, 3%, but good God, we're talking about only 3%. This is a low unemployment rate even though you're the top of the region. There's no reason to fret about this. Right now, West Georgia has seen 6,500 new positions come into the area. 6,500 new workers have come to the West Georgia area. This is between February 2020 and today, before the start of the pandemic. So we've recovered all the laborers that we lost during the pandemic and then some, and then a good number of them. Okay, so we're not doing badly in terms of the labor force, and the unemployment rate, the blue line here, still continues to be at historically record low levels. Douglas County has recovered 908 jobs above what it lost before the pandemic, or lost from before the pandemic. So you are up as well. The county is doing better than it did before the pandemic. So you're back as if you were ever gone. You weren't. Okay? One of the things I want to point out is that we have been talking about labor supply and what we're going to do about the fact that we can't find workers anymore. How many of you in here have lost workers and can't get new ones? Yeah, about a third of you in here are raising your hand that you're indicating you're trying to find workers and you don't have them. This started well before the pandemic. It's something that we thought that a lot of people were complaining about during the pandemic. We can't find labor, or late in the pandemic, we're trying to get our business started back. We're still seeing fast food restaurants unable to open up their dining area and only doing drive-through service because they don't have enough workers throughout the entire day. This started in 2010, okay? This straight line right here is basically the path we've been on for a long time now, more than 10 years. This is the number of quits. People have been quitting for over 10 years now, and it's been growing over time because the baby boomers are retiring. So this is not tied to the COVID, it's tied to aging out of the baby boomers from the system. In fact, if you look at COVID right here, quits declined significantly during the peak of COVID because you could stay home and you still got paid. How many of you'd quit if you stayed home, still had a paycheck coming in? Okay, put your hand down, you're telling a fib there. If you could stay home and you still got paid, most everybody would continue working even if you were at retirement age, and most people did. But after we started getting a handle on things and we started having vaccines available globally, people started quitting again because they had to go back to work or retire. Okay, so that's basically what's going on now. Uh-oh. So no need to quit here. Oh, there we go. The labor force nationally has just recovered, has just gotten back to where it was before the pandemic. We're still down about 1.6 million laborers, people working in people in the workforce. We're still down about 1.7 million. That's still a lot, but that's not Georgia. Georgia is actually up. Okay, so we're doing significantly better in terms of labor force than the rest of the country. Those people that stayed out were high risk, marginally attached, didn't have access to acceptable child care, it was either too expensive or not available to them locally, or they're actual retirees. And so those are the only people really that are left out of the labor force right now. Most of the people that had any intention of coming back are back. They aren't discouraged workers. How do I know? There's two different unemployment rates here. There's one called U3, which is at 3.5%. This is a traditional unemployment rate that you and I all know about. That's national, 3.5%. U5 is all those people that are unemployed plus discouraged workers. So if you subtract one from the other, you get total discouraged workers, which right now is only 0.7%. So basically less than 1% of our workforce is discouraged enough to stay out of the workforce. That's not large. If you look back into the Great Recession, we had as much as 8 or 10% of the workforce that were discouraged workers. Our local indicators, I'm going to skip through some of these, but we're going to hit this first one really hard. Douglas County is growing like crazy in the area of transportation and warehousing and retail trade. Transportation and warehousing added 1,600 of 4,120 jobs that came back to the county this past year. Almost half of the jobs were in transportation and warehousing. Y'all are becoming a warehouse magnet, okay? Y'all are the strongest growing warehouse magnet in the area too. We're also seeing retail trade up about 1,000. We're seeing lots of scattered growth in things like professional and scientific, which support some of these high-tech jobs. Administrative support, waste management, and remediation. That's a really long term for temp workers. The majority of the people in this area are temp workers, and when you see temp workers on the rise, that typically means the economy is still chugging right along because they're looking for new people to come in to replace people who've just left. They need them now. And so we're really doing well in Douglas County in terms of the number of jobs you've added over the past year. You can pat yourself on the back. We've got increases in basically all of the main industries. We've got increases, the blue line is the one to look at. Services are up. Retail is up. Healthcare is up. Transportation and warehousing is way up. Construction is basically the only one that we're seeing flatten out and head in the downward direction, significantly down. And construction is one of those that basically tracks along with the housing market. This has to do with interest rates and how interest rates are starting to cool the housing market off. Manufacturing has actually rebounded to the point in the West Georgia region to where it was before the Great Recession. Okay, so we have recovered all of those jobs and we've added one. But one is more than not one. Okay? One of the things we look at also is how popular you are. Everybody knows that everything is a popularity contest, and right now Georgia is pretty dadgum popular. What I say is that even though we're not in the top 10 in terms of percentage growth, we're in the top 10 and a half. We're next. We're 11th. Okay? Georgia is only behind places like Idaho, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and I don't even know what's there. Okay, anybody ever been to Idaho? No, you couldn't have gone to Idaho. Nobody's from Idaho. There's so little in Idaho. The reason that Idaho is showing this kind of growth is because people are moving out of Washington State to Idaho, and Idaho is tiny. It has a relatively small base, and so if 20 people move into Idaho, you've got a 1.5% increase in wages. Okay, so Idaho is growing, but growing from a small base. Where is it growing? Douglas County is among those counties that are growing. Douglas County right now is at about 8.9% over the last 10 years, 8.9% population growth. People are moving here to take advantage of jobs you have here. You're not growing as fast as Coweta, Cobb, Paulding, or a lot of the counties on the east side of Atlanta, but there's reasons for that. You got to drive into the sun both ways. That actually does have an impact. People move to where it's easy to commute from. This is a clumsy segue. We're also going to talk a little bit about we're going to talk a little bit about the inflation rate. Right now, we're heading on the downhill slide of the inflation rate. We've hit our peak and we've started improving. We've started seeing improvements in the inflation rate. We peaked out near 9%. In fact, if you look locally, we peaked out closer to 12%, 11.5%, 12%. So we actually had worse inflation than the rest of the country. Okay, so we're improving. You can see we're down on the downhill slide as well. And so the things the Fed's doing is actually having an impact right now. We're starting to see prices decline. We're starting to see slower growth in those prices that haven't declined. We've seen energy prices start to turn around. Things are starting to move in the right direction. But it's still going to take some time, and it's also going to take a little more pain. There's some pain in the future. Advanced retail sales, they're trucking right along. Gross sales tax receipt doing the same thing, primarily because prices are still high. Sales tax receipts go along with prices. If you pay for something that costs more, you're going to pay more in sales tax in Georgia. One of the things I want to point out is that there's a problem going to be coming to us in the future, nationally. Consumer spending is doing well. And remember that 2/3 of our economy is consumer spending, consumption. Real wages, however, have taken a little bit of a nosedive. What's wrong with this? It means that as spending rises and real income falls, we're going to have to start thinking about debt. And what do we see? Actually, nothing. There we go. Credit card debt has started to move back upwards from a relatively low level. We had almost no credit card debt, primarily because most everybody lost the ability to use a credit card during the recession, during the pandemic, because their credit went to crap. But it's starting to come back. Credit card debt's starting to move upward again, but it's still starting from a relatively low level. Automobile sales are improving. We're starting to see more on the lot. Prices are starting to decline a little bit, but not a lot. And so that's going to be something that we need to look at going forward. I'm going to skip a couple of slides because I think I'm running out of time. So let's take a couple of these. One of the things I want to point out, though, is that of those car manufacturers that we're paying more for and we're buying more of, those are companies that we have a direct connection to. Kia, Hyundai, and Honda are all companies that build parts or manufacture cars in our region here. And every one of these from 1994 to present day have increased total market share. And so even though the prices are going up, so are the incomes that are attached to those that are your neighbors. Your neighbors' incomes are going right along with that. The housing market, we all know that the housing market has started to trend a little bit in the sideways or downward direction. We've seen regionally, this is the regional market for Atlanta, we've actually seen prices start to decline. Not a lot. That's not a big movement here. But it's the direction that matters. It started to go down. We've also still seen, at least nationally, a relatively low inventory of houses available. We don't have a lot of houses for sale. We don't have a lot of empty houses that are available for people to move into. So supply is down, demand is down, prices may not go very low. They're probably going to drop a little bit, but you're talking about two movements of supply and demand, and we don't know exactly where that's going to end up. Locally, and this is the West Georgia area, what we've seen is days on the market had driven itself down, 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 and now it's flattened out. And it started heading back in the other direction. It takes longer to sell a house now than it did just a few months ago. Basically, July was our peak, and we're starting to head in the opposite direction now. The housing market's getting a little bit tougher. Single-family permits have started to decline. And part of this has to do with lumber prices. Lumber prices have started to moderate recently, but you can't build houses overnight. Okay, so in short, we're still doing pretty well. I'm very optimistic about what we're going to see going forward over the next year. I think we probably are going to nationally experience something that looks like a recession. And the reason I say looks like a recession is that we're not supposed to say that word in public. So it's going to look something like a recession, but I do believe that Georgia, and specifically the Atlanta metropolitan area, is in a position to weather this pretty well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ian. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'll try and do a little different tact on some of this stuff, although we are going to overlap a little bit in some of the themes, and I think a lot of those themes are important. By way of background, before I joined MAC, I actually worked for a decade for Bank of America in commercial lending, doing strategy and analytics, and I ran an industry risk team. So probably I know something about the industry you're in because I had to edit or write and manage profiles on pretty much any industry you can think of. I also, prior to that, I worked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So a lot of those data points, such as the Consumer Price Index he was pointing to, that we created that data there. At the end of my time there, I was actually in charge of the macro forecast, long-run macro forecasting. One thing I learned about macro forecasting, we'll get into this theme, is not so much that I think I'm so great at it, but that I have a limited confidence in its accuracy short run. That's really what I learned. So overall, I'm a little more positive than this gentleman here on macro. I think we will eke out growth this year. It'll be low. It's going to be close to recession. But I'm a little more positive than the average economist right now. You can see, I think the labor market still remains very strong, as he was talking about. We totally agree 100% on that. We have a tight labor market. I think it's changed a bit, though. There's a lot of leading dynamics there that say, probably most of you, I don't know, raise a hands. Have you guys seen less worker turnover in the last 6 months than you were the year prior? Have you guys? Yeah, I'm getting some head nodding there. You're starting to see that. You're feeling that this is getting to be more of what, a normal labor market felt like, not the crazy chaos, which was driving up those quits so high because everyone was just stealing everyone else's workers very quickly. But I think, we do face some real headwinds, as he was talking about the Fed. The Fed is hiking rates. That is very intentionally slowing the economy right now. I think maybe they're overdoing it. I've tried to tell Raphael that at MAC. He's pretty involved. He doesn't really listen to me too much. No, I'm just kidding. I try to not tell Raphael what to do. I'm making a joke in there. I think the big unknown this year is the China reopening piece. One thing we've really benefited from with inflation coming down is you guys have noticed this. How's your pump price doing? You know, price at the pump, at least if you're not buying diesel. If you have a diesel vehicle, that's a little painful. But if you're talking gasoline, it's down a good bit. China is the 800-pound gorilla in every single commodity out there. They consume the majority of world metal supply. Literally, the majority of any metal you can think of goes to China. Some of that gets re-exported in products, but a lot of that is in construction supplies. They're adding more cars every year. They're buying more cars than we are every year. And a lot of times they're not replacing existing cars like we do. They're adding to their car supply. And a lot of developing countries. So in terms of oil prices, they're a big 800-pound gorilla. But they also have quite a housing bubble bursting right now. So we don't know how much of their slowdown has been the housing bubble and how much has been their COVID shutdowns. But anyway, we'll get into the details here. And then I'm going to hit a couple long-run points on what we're seeing in the population down here, kind of overlapping, but hopefully adding to what we were hearing about already. Let me give you this chart. I always like this one on the left here, but it takes some getting used to. If a metro area, and the size of the bubble is the size of the employment in each metro area. Can everyone hear me in the back, by the way? Am I good? Okay. If it's above this horizontal line, that means employment is above pre-COVID peak employment. They've recovered and then some. And then if further to the right is over the last 6 months, what's been the job growth rate recently over the last 6 months? I think a couple of things. One, Dallas has just had an unbelievable performance, quite an outlier there. But if you look, there's real regional clustering. You can see the Sun Belt, we're all tightly packed together here. You definitely see Atlanta's slowed down in the last few months a bit. We were more an outlier out here, and that's why we're still so far ahead of pre-COVID peak employment. I think part of it is the labor market's gotten so tight, it's simply hard to find workers. I think manufacturing, for example, was struggling because the transportation piece was up so much. Warehouses were up so much, and it's a lot of the same workers. If you look, though, then you see the other regional clusters. You'll see New York. If you put Philly on here, it'll basically be on top of New York. If you put Minneapolis on here, it'll be on top of Chicago. I did that for Target the other day. LA, and you can see the two tech cities right here, kind of very similar clustering. So you'd see part of why the Fed waited so long to raise rates was these cities were all still pretty far from peak employment. They had a lot looser labor markets than we did. So we were at a pretty tight labor market more than a year ago. Things were pretty tight. It took a while longer for those metros, and they'd still like to see these metros get back to peak, to at least break even on peak employment. You can see, though, overall, our growth is slowing. What we grew in 2021 versus 2022, you can see the job growth rate in Atlanta is about half what it was. That's definitely, again, that slowing theme. We're not seeing the crazy growth, but still 3% is really good. Don't be, again, things are really good, but it's not the craziness. And you can see specific industries. Information, by the way, that just means like software. It's software publishing. It got called under publishing in the data. That hasn't slowed yet. We think that's coming. Although really we've outperformed pretty well in that. I was talking to the person who owns the Google offices, and he was saying, when Google said to their workers, come back to work, but we don't really care which office you come into. They had a whole lot of workers from the West Coast say, yeah, I'll go into the Atlanta office, especially black workers. There were a lot of black professionals said, hey, I'll feel at home in Atlanta. I don't quite feel at home in Seattle or San Francisco. And so, that's really been, and when we talk up to these companies about diversity, that's part of what we talk about, is there is a very large, very well-educated black population in Atlanta that's growing very quickly. Certainly, your county, when I look at the income data, you have, median household incomes actually between black and white households are very similar in your county here, in Douglas County. Overall, economic indicators are weakening, though just in terms of in general. You can see this was sort of that thing when people pretended it was a recession because people, forgot, basically said, well, in my Econ 101 textbook, if GDP goes down for 2 quarters in a row, that's a recession. I'd say there's a lot of other indicators out there, and I think it was more some weird blips in the data. You can see Goldman does a combined activity index, and you can see it was very positive during that period. I was very outspoken, not a recession, we were not seeing one. But now you can see that's getting pretty low. We're basically at break even. I'm hoping long run we can come a little under our long run peak potential. But still, even though all the news is very negative, only about a third of forecasters right now, of professional economic forecasters, are actually forecasting a recession next year, but a whole lot of them are forecasting basically flat growth. That's actually basically a break even. So right on that edge of recession, right on that knife edge is the most popular forecast. You wouldn't quite, so roughly a third are forecasting recession. You wouldn't quite know that from the media right now. The media is very much like, this is a consensus in the economic community. It's a debate. Obviously, you have both sides of the debate here. I think that's a healthy idea. I have no confidence I'm right or he's wrong or vice versa. Overall, though, at a state level, we're seeing stuff slow pretty dramatically. So this was in May. You can see every state was experiencing relative to its own baseline pretty fast growth. You can see now it's slowed down a lot around the country, but the only states in negative are like, if it's yellow or orange, look at them. These are all states, Montana, Wyoming, speaking of the Idaho jokes. These are basically the smallest states in the country, except for maybe Arizona. Other than that, you look here, it's really all the major states are still experiencing fairly positive growth. But again, it's not that rapid, crazy pace. We are still getting positive. But this is coincident. As you can see, job growth-wise, we are adding jobs quickly at a very quick rate. In fact, our worst month in the last year in terms of job growth exceeded the best average we had over the last 20 years. So this is the average for each year over the last 20 years. You can see this month still higher than any single year. And that was, December was essentially our worst month in terms of job growth. What he was talking about in terms of the tight labor market starting back in 2014, 15, 16. We can definitely see that in earnings data. And this is actually, when we talk about income inequality, no one's really saying this yet, but it's shrinking. That probably isn't something anyone's been telling you, because it's really been those warehouse workers. It's been Amazon creating a $15 minimum wage. That's been the tightest part of the labor market, but we're also seeing that turn the most. So it is, when you look, who's getting the biggest wages? Great Atlanta Fed does this cool data source where they actually look at individuals, so it can capture them like switching jobs. And they say over the last year, they survey them 1 year, and then the next year they ask them, how much money are you making? And they say it's the workers in the bottom 25%. That's what first quartile means, it's just bottom 25%. You can see back around 14, 15, before then they were really hurting. They were getting the smallest raises. Now they started getting the biggest raises, and they were about the only people really keeping up with inflation for a while. This tends to be younger workers. This is somewhat less educated workers. They're going to switch jobs a lot. Part of that switching was, I can get a raise. I mean, heck, I've worked in enough industries to know companies don't give you a raise unless they have to. And part of how they have to is when you start quitting in big numbers, and either they steal you or they realize they got to pay you more to keep you. So we've seen that, especially at the lower end. This is it's that warehousing effect. You guys are benefiting from a tremendous amount of warehousing construction here. But overall, wages have been growing across the country. You can see, though, Georgia's been particularly hot. We've had some of the fastest wage growth over the last year of any state. We also have one of the highest job openings rate of any state. So we have a lot of openings. That's part of driving all those quits. Why do you normally quit? Because I got my next job lined up. So why it's that there's a lot of openings. But again, this is a crazy high rate, but it's coming down. Like all of these were just absolute outliers statistically. And that's part of the problem with all of our economic models right now, is they were built on a data set of 40 or 50 years of history. We actually haven't had that many recessions in the last 40 or 50 years, so it's a pretty small sample size. And if you know modeling, that matters a lot. But also, all the numbers we have going into these models are out of range, basically. They're not normal range of what we've experienced. So it's really tough to model and forecast when we've experienced an economy that's really like nothing else we've experienced in the last 40 or 50 years. If we look at home prices, you can see Atlanta's building a ton of apartments. We're going to get the most vacancies in the fanciest apartments, basically, but overall our vacancy rate is starting to kick above the national average. I think that's a really healthy thing. That's bringing down the inflation. The biggest reason there's a difference between different metro areas and inflation, it's housing costs. A lot of other stuff is fairly consistent, or it's long-term gaps. Like, grocery prices might be higher somewhere where, like New York, where, all the underlying structural costs are just higher for groceries. Workers, real estate, everything. And so what's short run, what moves inflation, it's rent. It's owner equivalent rent. It's basically the cost of home ownership. So what's happening, Atlanta's really, we've had no absorption in apartments in the last year. So basically the same number of apartments were rented this year as last year, which is kind of crazy given our population growth. It tells you that people have been doubling up more than they had previously. And we've had a huge amount of construction. So what that means is vacancies are going up. We haven't seen price growth in rents in the last few months overall across the metro area. Even out here, we have about 500 units under construction. That's very unusually high. Even if that doesn't seem like a lot, that's actually pretty high by historical standards for this area. But at the same time, you have a ton of warehouses coming in here. And so I think it's going to be fine. Note that the home prices, where are home prices declining? It's generally the Western United States. Think a technology story. This is a lot of, if you're a very tech-heavy metro, that's not a healthy thing. You need a balanced economy. I think Atlanta's really actually one of the most balanced economies and diverse economies in the country. So let's look at the two markets in the east, well, not quite so east, but east where home prices have declined a lot. I'll tell you, it's Austin and Raleigh. What are those two places have in common? They're probably the most concentrated in technology employment of any metro areas in the east. Atlanta has a lot of tech employment, but it's not, as a percent of our total employment, not that big a share. Overall, you can see in Douglas County, you guys have 5.8 million square feet under construction. You can see it's by historical standards, a huge amount of warehouse space. I'm sure you guys notice this driving around. You see the trucks everywhere. You're like, oh my God, another one's going up. At the same time, I think, this is how do we absorb 500 apartments pretty quickly? We put up this many warehouses. Also, while people are worried about the office market, and Atlanta's vacancies are pretty high in the office market, I'm not super worried about overconstruction here because our vacancy rate is incredibly low. And the other reality, I'll get into some of the demographics of why I think this works a lot for us. But you can see, we have Atlanta metro areas, roughly 7.5% of all industrial space under construction in the country is here. It's about double that if you go up the I-85 corridor here to Raleigh. So really that corridor, and then up 75 is a whole lot of other industrial construction going up. So this whole metro area. But I think thematically, and I'll hit this theme, I don't want to go over time-wise here. The big issue right now is that our population is aging really quickly, and I think that kind of works in our favor here. But I think also this is a fundamental challenge every company is going to face. While our population may be growing, our labor force isn't really. You can see it's really the over 65 population that's taken off. Once you hit 70, people don't really work. So like when we talk about older workers working, the retirement age gets pretty high. Retirement rate, odds are you retired, gets really high once you hit 70. People sometimes say 65 to 74. Well, the problem was people look at that data and say, look, it's going up. I said, yeah, because for a while it was 65 to 69 was the baby boomers. They were this big hump of the population. And this is the population by age, how percent of the population each age year. And you can see essentially we have two humps. We have the baby boomers and their echo, the millennials. And so they're moving to the burbs. These kids are moving to the burbs. These guys are retiring. And what's behind them is a lot smaller. So this issue with the labor force is not just a short-run thing we're going to have. And this is a really big deal for the long-run growth of the U.S. economy because essentially you grow by growing your population or you grow by being more productive. And we think, productivity is probably 1.5% a year is what you can do in productivity gains. So essentially, that really is a huge headwind for our economy. But yeah, to confirm what this gentleman was saying here, why have people left the labor force during COVID? They did some really cool Fed paper recently, broke it down. You can see it's spiked for a little while and now it's come down a bit. And you can see almost every reason people left the labor force has basically disappeared. It's pretty low on caregiving now or other. It's retirements. It's this. This is the real story. It got pulled forward. A lot of people kind of maybe retired a couple years earlier than they might have. Maybe they said life's short. Or my nest egg looks really good. That's maybe pulling some of them back in now because their nest eggs don't look quite as good. But this is a structural thing. This isn't like just a cyclical, in a year or two, this is going to change thing. And here's the positive for us. Is we're still growing. Georgia last year added 125,000 people. And you can see that placed us fourth amongst states numerically. And it was heavily driven by 81,000 people moving from other states. So that we had a little bit of natural population growth, some international migration, and a lot of people moving from other states. You can see California and New York had huge population declines, large population declines, but it would have been much worse if not for international migration. International immigration picked up a lot last year, went from maybe 250,000 to about 1 million. Long run with that labor force issue, that's a big deal. We need that growth. But you can see it really was saved California from a much larger decline. If it weren't for, people are still moving out of California and New York in droves. New Yorkers are often moving here. Californians tend to be Texas, Arizona, and some of these Mountain West states. But I'll get into one more thing. So long run, you can see over the since 2010, the U.S.'s labor force is only up 7%. It's only, if this were 100, it's only up 7%. Douglas County's up 12, Atlanta metro area is up 16, and there's definitely room to grow here. So if you're a company and you say, hey, look, I see the labor force is not going to grow. I see that I'm going to be fighting tooth and nail for workers. So I think a lot of companies are going to say, and I think we're seeing this. We're definitely seeing this. I don't think this is not a supposition. It's what we hear when we talk to, someone like some of the home chef that Mac helped get here. That was something we help recruit companies, so we worked with your chamber on that. Or some of the data centers. They're looking at somewhere where they say, where can I find workers? And you'd say, okay, well, I should look here. And also, if you think of our area for warehouses, why are we putting so many more warehouses here in distribution centers? Yeah, same thing. Where's the population of the U.S. growing? Where is Atlanta basically dead center of? It's how do you serve all these growing population? How do you serve those people? And you have access to some really good ports fairly close. So you can see overall labor force is growing. I think this is one other neat stat, totally different topic, how important cost of living is, how important is we continue to build housing and we continue to build it robustly. Cost of living is a huge impact on standard of living. Like how far does your dollar go? And the reality is, if you live in California, if you live in Los Angeles County, that's red here, and I'll explain what the red means here. You'd be in the 90th percentile of counties. You'd be in the top 10% of counties in terms of household income. You adjust for their cost of living, you're in the bottom 15% of counties. Los Angeles County literally moves from top 10 to bottom 15 in that. So how does Douglas do? Douglas actually moves from about 79th percentile of counties, so that's ranking them 1 to 100, where would you rank in terms of household income, to 89th percentile here. You can see moves up, there are about 3,000 counties in the US, so you can see how much Douglas County moves up in the rankings from about 700th to about 332nd. This is done by a firm called C2ER that looks at cost of living. So this is, this is why I think long run, but this is also when you look at the counties that really benefit from lower cost of living, driving up household incomes relative to their incomes. It's the industrial Midwest, I think, because it's just not growing, so housing is cheap. But also, it really is a map of the growth. Where is growth happening in the United States? A lot of those green places. Miami actually lost people last year. That's how we became a bigger metro than Miami. We grew and they shrank because their cost of living's gotten so out of hand. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Sorry, I don't want to go too long. One, thematically, economic conditions are slowing, but it's still really good. Your labor conditions are improving, but it's still a tight labor market, and you have to think of this as not a short-run problem, but this is a long-run problem. You're going to have to deal with it for a long time. I think I'm not super worried about the industrial space, despite the huge amount of supply coming into the market. because fundamentally the vacancy rates are at unhealthily low levels, which is a good thing. So now we have so little vacancy. And finally, what are your long-run demographics? I think that's really a story that helps us here. I'm happy, by the way, to send out the slides afterwards and share those. And I know we're going to wrap it up and have a section for questions here. So. Well, I'll keep
Thank you so much, Ian and Dr. Smith. If you don't mind coming back up, we'll have time maybe for one quick question. Great program. I'll take that for you. Just one question. Anybody have one burning question today?
The answer is no.
Okay. We'll take that. Again, thank you so much, gentlemen. That was a great presentation. So now for a few announcements, and then we'll do door prizes. Go ahead and get excited about that because we have some great prizes for you. Just for the announcements, so the Douglas County Chamber is gearing up for the Winter Ball and Community Awards on February the 4th. You are invited to partner with us to support our efforts by securing a sponsorship or donating to the silent auction or stock the bar pool, right? Fun. The Chamber uses all proceeds to support our mission to promote an inclusive business community that collaboratively drives economic growth, sustainability, and the innovation for a lasting positive impact in the Douglas region. Please submit your auction items by next Friday, January the 27th. And lastly, I want to thank Greystone Power for the naming sponsorship and Conley Jordan and Associates and Metro Garage Door Installation and Fireplaces for hosting us today. Now I'll invite Andrew back up so that we can draw our door prizes. Now, Miss Bird, Tanya Bird, last year started something that I think we should continue to keep going for 2023. When you get your free door prize, I need you to make some noise, okay? I need you to show excitement, okay? So let's see if we're gonna follow directions well, all right? Andrew, please draw our first door prize. And can you tell us what the prize is?
It's our coffee cups and $25 Amazon gift card.
Okay, these prizes are coffee cups and a $25 Amazon gift card, okay? Now, that'll make you scream, right? Ticket number, last four is 3488. All right. Did y'all hear that? Woo, how he projected his voice. Let's keep that going, okay? All right, two more prizes. All right, last four is 3491.
Yeah.
Yes, Charles. All right, last and final. Last four, 3496. What was it? 3496. All right. That's how you do it. Well, thank you for attending the luncheon today. We have a packed house, and I love it. We'd love to see you back next month. Y'all have a wonderful afternoon, and take care.